Can everyone hear now? Great. So for our panel, first of all, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. We have Julian, who is speaking about X right now. So Julian is a serial investor and community creator who started ODF back in 2018, and he has recently started Solar Founders. ODF has been an incubation for more than 1,000 startups by now, who have gone on to create and raise multi-billion dollars. They have raised more than $2 billion now. We also have Noémie, who runs the Founders Fellowship at ODF, and she really assists with admissions, recruiting, and all of those amazing things. She works in a super niche space where she takes care of all the immigration problems the entrepreneurs have, plus the investing side as well. We have Bailey, who incubated his company out of ODF, cal.com. He leads a team of more than 25 people now and has raised more than $32.4 million, attracting more than 150,000 users, and has clients with multiple government agencies and enterprises. We also have Nishkaam. He is the CEO of Abound, which is a super app designed for NRI, specifically living in the US, and it provides competitive remittance back to India, and they're now expanding into savings, investments, and alternative investments. So that's great to have everyone here. Amazing. I would like to start with if each one of you, maybe starting from Bailey, if you can each share a quick anecdote, a moment, big or small, where something just clicked and you felt like, this is the path I'm meant to be on, and why you started your community, why you joined a community, or why you started your company. That would be great.
Yeah, I always wanted to be a founder. It was always just something that had to be in the cards for me. I have a problem with authority. I always feel like most of the bosses I've had are just an idiot or something. Not to say that I'm anything other than an idiot, but nevertheless. And, I think for becoming a founder, it's something I always knew I wanted to do, but, just built so many things, and, I'd spend months and months working on them, and they'd just completely flop. And it really takes a lot of failures to eventually get one success. And once that one success hits, it makes all of those wasted tens or even hundreds of thousands of hours on everything that you've tried before so worth it. And it always comes at like a really random small moment. I remember on like launch day for cal.com, I took like a bathroom break at 3 p.m. And as I was like standing there in the bathroom, I was like, wait, this could actually be a thing. Like this could be a real company instead of just a random project. So, maybe it's not that, crazy idolized story. Maybe you're just there in the bathroom, realizing that maybe your startup's a real thing. But it's always just an incredible moment and an incredible memory. That time where everybody has it just clicks and you're like, wow, I can do this.
It's great. So hey everybody, so look, right, I guess maybe for me, it was not, like it wasn't one singular moment or like an epiphany, but I would say it was a sequence of organic moments where you saw these micro clicks where you said, you know what, I'm seeing signal in this, I'm seeing signal in this. And so for me, just to share like a little bit of what we're doing, we're Abound, we're like a money remittance app to India. I started off as an EIR at the Times of India group, like a household name for like a lot of you who are Indian. And for me, because it was an EIR type thing, my approach to a startup was more top down, which is here's a thesis on NRIs or Indian expats as an audience. And so we started off with like a landing page experiment. So I would say that was my first click. And then we started seeing signal on there. And so we said, well, let's progressively increase the friction and let's really validate is this an audience that would be into this, right? And so then the next version of the landing page experiment was first to add a bit more friction. We added this credit card field in there, right? And then when I saw people putting their credit card number for a landing page, that's when I thought, you know what, this is no longer a waitlist experiment where you just go put your name and email for the sake of it, because that's low friction. But now like here's an actual credit card number, like somebody's down to put info that is very sacred to them. And for me, that was like micro click one. Click number two was when we started to distribute via the Times of India group, and we realized, hang on, like we can move money or move users from the Times to us. And then the third one was when we started to do more distribution partnerships. So I think for me, it was a series of micro moments, and I would say somewhat intentional, but somewhat organic, about where are we seeing signal and how do I take risk off the table. And so, here's risk that we can get a product or like at least build a vision that is engaging to people, and then build a, and then take risk off the table, knowing that we can acquire users for cheaper than like Remitly or Wise or somebody else can. And it's a lot, right? Like I'll say this. I think there's still a lot of risk on the table, and so it's never like a binary 0 to 1. Oh, this is now clicking, but it's always, you'll have like a lot of noise inherently, but there's these like micro moments of signal, some in the bathroom, some over like a 2 a.m. Zoom call with your team in India, where you say, well, hang on, like that thing is working among all of the other things that are not working. So that was the journey for me, and I feel like it's still the journey, and I don't think that ever stops. So, yeah. So,
hey everybody. Can I just talk without the mic? Is that cool? Oh, you can hear me back there? All right. Quick show of hands. Who is in this room right now? It's supposed to be everybody. Come on. I'm testing to make sure that people they're actually here and awake. I'm Julian, co-founder of ODF and Solo. Yeah, I'll talk about something that clicked. And what you said about sort of risk elimination was something that kind of clicked for me right now, which is this idea that everybody talks about startups being risky. And sure, to some extent they are, but I think that generally startups are actually about eliminating risk, figuring out ways to actually prove things and sort of actually get the risk out so that you can actually just focus on, making sure that you're actually solving a real problem, for instance. And in terms of risk elimination, we think about people starting companies and helping them start companies. One of the biggest risks that you could have with a company is your co-founder and you having a huge brawl, hating each other, and then the company shutting down, right? That is like, raise your hand if you know somebody who had a co-founder where they had a nasty breakup. It's actually about half the room. Okay. The reality is, great co-founders like Pure and Bailey, they are amazing. But the reality is, we think that a lot of times people have co-founders idiots, people who are actually not great co-founders. And this clicked for us as we were building ODF, a place for people to go and ostensibly find co-founders. We realized that if people could actually go and find co-founders who are outside of their peer group, they're sort of like people that they went to school with or people that they worked with, they might actually find better co-founders because they're expanding sort of their search criteria, right? And so we did that, and that was the first thing that clicked. The second thing that clicked, though, was we realized, wait a second, do you actually need a co-founder to be successful? Not necessarily saying that you shouldn't have a co-founder or a great co-founder isn't amazing. Clearly, it could be incredible. But the idea is maybe you don't actually need one. Maybe you could actually start on your own, and that's actually much better than having a suboptimal pick. So that's the second sort of click. ODF was to help people find co-founders and collaborators, and solo founders is to help encourage people to understand that being solo is actually a valid path. So those were like the two sort of realizations that we had.
Yeah. Who can hear me? Everyone can understand my accent? 50-50. Cool. I'm Noémie. I've been working with founders for the past 5 years, always been around people who have an issue with authority. I do one myself. First in Europe, and I moved to the Bay 2 years ago. My click was I had a really traumatizing call with a lawyer who I will not name drop, but it told me on a work call to get married to a random VC to save company funds. And it made me so mad that I started open sourcing a bunch of immigration content and helping people who want to start companies not get stuck on a 10-year green card line before they can build something. I think building a company is the extension of yourself, and it's something that's really brave to do. It's hard enough as it is. You shouldn't have to go and figure out the immigration bit. So we have tons of immigrants part of ODF, and we help them, figure out the best way to quit and build their companies. And solar as well. 5 out of the 6. We don't discriminate.
Amazing. So we do have a quick link. So if you want to go here, scan it, and you can put in your questions. I'll give a few more moments to scan it. Yep. So feel free to put any of the questions you have for the panelists. I have this little poll which will lead into our next question. what do you think is the biggest bottleneck you faced as an immigrant founder or someone, who's thinking to start a company? What are some of the biggest hurdles which you feel are tangible and could be solved by the people here? Yeah. Yeah, I definitely knew that the visa or immigration risk would be the most. So, great. I would love to hear thoughts on what do you guys think the biggest hurdles are, except from the ones which are already on the screen, and how do you think the best people who you have seen navigate it have done it, and what are some of the simple things which people in the room can do? I know Noémie was talking about there's a lot of little steps which people can take to eliminate these risks and hurdles. So maybe we can start from Billy.
Yeah, so I think one of the big ones that I really recognize is just the lack of network, because as immigrants, we basically just one day end up in a new country and we're probably in San Francisco or New York or something like that, and we know absolutely nobody. And that's difficult, because if you grew up here, went to school here, everything like that, you've probably started to network with Americans and things like that all your life. And whether or not you have an extensive network by the time you start, you're at least used to that kind of thing. Whereas, like one day you just book a flight here and absolutely not a single person. I moved to the US, to New York, and I literally did not know anybody. And it's really hard just to kind of get from like 0 to 1. Because all this kind of stuff, it's compounding. Once you have that momentum behind, networking with a few people, then you're going to network with a lot of people. And, networking is so essential. Like I wouldn't be here even from a visa or immigration perspective if it wasn't for my network, especially if you're going for your O1s, EB1s. You need to be able to like call up some people and I can be like, yo, Julian, can you like sign a letter saying I was part of ODF and that ODF only accepts really cool founders, for immigration purposes. And it's things like that, it's so hard to build a network. And, one of the coolest things you can do though is just share so much about your journey. You guys familiar with the term build in public? About sharing every stage of your journey? Do that. Do the hell out of that. There's no such thing as oversharing. A lot of guys, when they think about like posting on YouTube or something like that, or starting to become an influencer, you always think the first thing has to be perfect. It doesn't. Just put yourself out there, because by showing the world what it is that you do, people then start to gravitate towards you. If you're just a really cool founder out there building, all the investors, they're going to come to you. All of like the friends and users and things like that, they're going to come to you. So whether or not you're already running a successful product or something like that, as an immigrant founder, you should really just share every stage of your journey, because that's just going to really help you like get kicked off the ground and at least get those first few, whatever it is that you need. I know for me, it was a big thing, investors coming to the US and not knowing a single one. But, share what it is that you're doing and they will eventually come to you. And then you kind of get in the rhythm of it. And like I say, the rest just kind of compounds from there, and you can build huge networks as a result of that.
So that's pretty interesting. And so look, right? Like I'll just share my journey. And look, my answer to this is going to be somewhat cheesy AF, but I think it's very real, because I feel like all of these are very valid concerns. Like I had a startup of mine in undergrad and college, scaled it up really well just by way of traction, but had no idea what venture capital was. I wasn't making any money. And like I graduated from uni over here, and so I had to get somebody to sponsor my visa. So I shut my startup down, right? And then, and like honestly, always played it safe, right? Which is, here's like a corporate job, right? And then started to incrementally inch my way into what it is that I wanted to build. And so went from like a tech job to, an EIR at like a VC fund. So I never had to worry about where my paycheck was going to come from. How do I stick around here in the US, have a valid visa? At the same time, in hindsight, I would have just done it a long time ago. And so I think my biggest hurdle wasn't that I had to solve for a visa, wasn't that I didn't know any VCs, but it was that I hadn't built a product yet where I could get real users and then show the traction. Because I feel like if you're really excellent at what it is that you do, you have a product, you have users, stuff will come to you. Like Visa will get solved, your integration stuff will automatically get figured out, VCs will come in. And so in some ways, all of this falls into place once you start. And for me, like I played it super safe, right? I said, here's a tech job, here's a visa, I've got a paycheck, I'm working as an EIR. But until I built a product and until I got users and like revenue, all of this could have been solved a long time ago. And so I think in some ways, and this is the cheesy part, is that my biggest bottleneck was in some ways it was me and like not starting sooner. But that's something, you know, which I would share is that like, in this day and age, don't wait, just start. Like you've got AI that can help you code. You can go a lot further with all the tooling that you have today than like you had about a couple of generations ago. But yeah.
Let's bounce it around so it's not just going left to right or right to left.
Cool. I can talk about the two things I see the most with immigrants. The first one, and it continues what you were saying, it's like flipping the things. So people are obsessed about their visas, and so they will grab like a random person to work with. A company is like it's semi-permanent, so you should be kind of sure who you're signing documents with. They'll take money at terrible terms because they're like, I need to fundraise for my visa. And most tragically, they'll start working on stuff that they don't really have conviction on. I understand the stress around visas. I really do. Usually you have a bit of leeway, even if it's a month. Make sure that like you have conviction on what you're working on, because then you'll get users and then VCs will follow and that will help with the visa. Same with co-founders. Like we help a lot of solo founders who are immigrants. There are ways of doing it. Lawyers don't always tell you, but like good lawyers will know different paths that you can take. So the second one would be just like make sure you know what options you have. Like if you're on an H1B, you can transfer and be part-time. Like yes, the prevailing wage is high, but like it is possible. If you're on an F1 and you are at university, you can start building your company. We work with Dravya from Supermemory who did that, and then, you know, we helped him with his O1 and now he's charging customers. So there's a bunch of stuff you can do before. You don't need to fantasize about starting a company. You can really start, and then the rest will figure itself out.
Yeah, I guess like one thing I will say, just, you know, obviously I think it's recording, so I'm not going to say the name of the firm, but it's a firm that everyone who knows anything about venture capital has probably heard of before. There are people out there who are doing sharky things to immigrant founders or to founders who want to immigrate because they feel like they have the upper hand. They think that they can go and they can do different firms because they think that you will feel desperate and you feel like you really need that. And I think that that's frankly shit. And I think that you shouldn't fall for that and you shouldn't let them coerce you. And I think you should be really careful about it. They'll tell you these things are thick. But look, AI, that personal network, then you could ask and if you actually look at the document, you'll find out that, you know, you have people who don't get stuck, you ask strap on at the bottom of stuff isn't actually as standard as their investor might make it out to be. But be really careful out there. You know, there was one founder who actually started with an investor, and only after he agreed to sort of valuation the amount of money did the other term, the things that they weren't told about when they were to lift the food. And one of those was actually that they wouldn't even get funded. They got the visa, which is sort of a chicken and egg type problem, right? So ultimately, that founder, who worked that, they went with other investors who not only didn't have that visa, it also gave them a 6x valuation. So the reality is, don't worry about bad people trying to do bad things to you. Screw them. Go and talk to other people. You'll be able to do that. And if you have anything that's worth investing in, you will have more than one person that's working with you. And don't just go with somebody out of. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really important. You're not in a position of weakness. And there are other ways than fundraising to get a visa. We work with a British guy who has like a really successful consumer app. He bootstrapped his revenue and applied for an O1. So there's like tons of different paths, but yeah.
I think something which I was really interested in is a lot of early stage fundraising is more about personality of the founder, the initial idea, and not so much about proven execution since you didn't have a lot of time since you started. What do you think makes a good pitch? Because I think we have a balanced number of people who pitch all the time and number of people who listen to pitches all the time. What do you think makes a great pitch? And what is the best way to like convey your idea to an investor or convey your idea to like a potential co-founder in the most effective way possible? Maybe let's start with Julian.
Okay. Yeah, I think when you're talking to investors, they want to understand who you are. They also want to understand what you're building. And they want to understand, is what you're building, does that have any relationship to each other? And if it doesn't, why should they trust that you might be a good person to build it? And then also they want to understand, relative to the amount of time you spend on it, is what you've accomplished so far fast, right? If you've only spent a week on something, probably shouldn't be talking about your depth. If you spent 3 months on something versus 3 years on something, threshold for what is impressive changes quite a bit, right? So you really want to understand, relative to where you are in your journey, does it seem impressive? So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, you really want to make sure that you're understanding what you're selling. Are you selling traction, like are people using your thing, or are you selling promise, like the promise of the future? And in many ways, even early traction is the promise of the future. But as soon as your product is being touched by actual users, people are now much more thoughtful about it, from analyzing what's actually happening versus just analyzing, sort of looking at tea leaves and trying to imagine what might happen in the future. Because they have a little bit more data. So I think that you have to be really mindful of when you create the base that.
Yeah, I think what ultimately makes a good pitch is just the confidence that you display. At the end of the day, it's a question of like, why are you guys listening to any of us? Well, what is it that we know? We're just people that can like look you in the eye and tell you something with conviction. That's why we're founders. That's why we're on this panel. And really, that's just kind of the thing you have to sell to anyone. And I think, whenever you think, people look at founders in a certain persona. Like whenever you think about your typical founder, it's like somebody with this dead set conviction and they believe that they're going to go to the moon, and there's this whole persona. And I mean, the reason why that works is because, when somebody displays such energy, you too get excited by it. If I just talk in a very boring tone and I build scheduling apps and it's like pretty cool. If I'm like, we are going to be like the new scheduling, we're going to power every single scheduling experience in the world. Like you immediately become so much more captivated. And I think that's difficult because I always grew up like quite an introvert. I was always the dude at the school plays. I was like right at the back and I never wanted any kind of part where anybody could see me. Yeah, as much disguise as I could possibly get. And then, like now I'm here and I'm chilling. But at first, I mean, you really just kind of have to fake it. If you are like a naturally charismatic, confident person, then, I think you can do great, but not all of us are that. And that's just a very real reality. But I think for me, for sure, I just had to keep on faking it. And then over time, I slowly got more and more like truly comfortable with myself. And I think it just, in the end, it makes it that whenever you're like pitching, that you just become so much more at ease. And hence, you're delivering the conviction, but you're also not seeming like you're trying too hard. And once you get that balance, that's when people like really respect what it is that you're talking about. And that kind of gives you like a sense of authority. And when talking to VCs, or to be honest, anyone in this space, you always want to convey a sense of authority. It doesn't matter who we are. Like maybe you don't know who like any of us are here. But you come to this talk and you listen to us, and there's a certain thing that these guys convey, and it's because we've been doing this. Maybe we've been faking it. Maybe it's natural for this long of a time. But eventually it just kind of like settles down into this true sort of like sense of security that you feel, and that stuff, just like any kind of good vibes, really radiates with the people that you talk to.
And so look, right? Like I'll say what they said, but also for me, what came up was that building a startup and like the venture map for like a VC behind it is actually inherently, it's like an irrational decision which they're making, right? Which is, here's an idea that's on a slide deck or here's an idea, we've got a few thousand users, and they're making a bet that this thing is going to go from a slide deck or like an MVP to like a multi-billion-dollar exit, right? And so it is by design an irrational process. And I feel like when I pitch to VCs, like the ones that have clicked has been speaking to them at a visceral level, right? Where it's not so much like a rational decision at that point, because the minute you get into like rational discussions early on in that process, then yeah, they'll ask you like, what's the TAM? What's your approach? What action do you have? What proof points have you worked on? Like all of that is real. But ultimately, it is an irrational decision for them viscerally, where they say, you know what, this is the guy that's going to crack this market as a large TAM. And in some ways, you are speaking to that. And I think you can only do that when you yourself believe it deep down. And it has to be like you have to believe it in your bones, that I'm the guy that's going to crack this market, and I'm uniquely positioned not to be able to pull this off. And so look, I think, and also because it is an irrational process, in some ways it is also a matchmaking process, right? Which is you've got to talk to people, get early feedback, always treat all feedback as a gift, because this is things that you're learning about your business, about your idea. And like I'm not saying that you blindly follow any advice that like an investor gives you, but treat it as a gift and not a personal criticism about you or your business. And I think as you start to digest it, and I think you start to embody yourself, this is my business and this is what I really believe in. And ultimately, if you believe there's going to be like a multi-billion-dollar exit, you automatically vibe at a different level, which I think is what you're talking about, right? And so look, I'll say that's especially true at the early stage. And as you go more later stage, it's less about you and your vision or the promise, but more about your numbers and how that stacks up relative to other people.
Cool. And super quickly, if you're getting started, you probably don't want to start talking to VCs yet. It's like a waste of time. Focus on your users. Things that talk louder than words. Your users loving you, your users wanting to invest, and your users recommending other users. That's it.
Yeah, users wanting to invest is a really, really big one. Yeah.
Good. I think a lot of founders start with like one core idea, but that rarely scales. You need to pivot, and you're often into this argument in your whole mind that, should I stick to my core vision or I'm getting some weird real world input? How do you navigate that challenge between, I started with a very solid idea, that's what I pitched to my investors, and now I really want to pivot? And how do you think one should go about that? Because I think people hear a lot about product market fit, but they don't really understand what it is until much later. So maybe we'll start with Nishkaam. So, yeah.
So for me, right, I guess, I would say for context, Abound is a super app for expats like NRIs here in the US. And so we always knew that we wanted to have our first product in the super app journey be an app where we can really understand the users, what are they spending their money on, what are they doing. And so we started off with like a rewards marketplace, knowing, that ultimately is not what's going to make us money, but enough signal on what users like and like what are they spending their money on that we would then go become those things. And so for me, it was a very iterative process intentionally from the very beginning. The mistakes I made was not moving fast enough, because it's very easy to get stuck into kind of your initial idea. And like we spent way too much time trying to like perfect the rewards marketplace. And I feel like we should have launched our money remittance offering, which is ultimately when you start to make money, and do that sooner. And so look, right, I guess I would say like my learning is that because you're an early stage company, there really is no wrong answer, because there's opportunity in like a lot of things that you do. And so don't be afraid to kind of go pivot or iterate, because ultimately, and this advice that I got from somebody, which like really stuck with me, is that when it's clicking, it feels really easy, right? And for me, the early parts weren't easy. And I mean, this building rewards is not super easy to do that anyway, right? And so I feel like you will know when it's clicking, and you'll instantly be able to tell. And so I would say, don't hesitate to kind of go pivot and go iterate.
Yeah, we have a pretty interesting story with this, because our idea didn't really change too much from when we started about 4.5 years ago. However, that being said, Cal.com was always intended to be a scheduling infrastructure company. We wanted to be more the back-end scheduling technology that powers everything. Although we never actually ended up building that until about 4 years in. And so although we really kind of like kept the long-term vision the same, the things in the short term definitely sort of changed up. And I'm trying to think of a good analogy here. I'm kind of thinking about how like currents, move things in the water. I think you need to be sort of like willing to adapt to what the current wants. And the current really is your users and the people that you're selling to. Because we launched Cal.com with a whole landing page about the infrastructure company that we were. And people were like, I really like signing up for this and using it as an individual. We're like, okay, I guess we're focusing on consumer now. So I think just like being very willing to just kind of like adapt to like the tides of what people want is going to enable you to build a huge company. I think that's probably very applicable for you in sort of like a mass consumer super app. There are so many different offerings. And, sometimes you might get pulled in one direction and we've like started to build in a certain area. And then, the signal kind of fades and then we just have to, move and iterate quickly and be like, okay, maybe this didn't work. Shut that down, try all these new things. That being said, I think there's something to be said about adapting quickly, but also not bending over backwards for, just like one specific user. It's always like a big temptation of early stage companies to like land one sizable deal, whatever that is comparatively for you. And then you're just like, I am willing to do anything for you. I will build any feature for you. Because like, I know companies like that. And there are some companies out there where they build any feature that like we want because we are their big deal. And I'm like, you probably shouldn't be doing that. Like, it's great for me, but is it so great for like you trying to build a business that scales? And I know everybody always says that thing, do things that don't scale. But I actually disagree with that. I think do things that scale. Let your product be willing to move and adapt, but in a way that will scale to all of your massive amounts of individual users or enterprise users. Make sure this stuff works across all of your customers, and don't kind of get caught either A, being too rigid that your product never moves, or B, kind of being too loose and like letting one company or one customer, sort of drive the whole product roadmap.
I mean, I think they pretty much covered it, so I don't know if we have much else to really want to say, but I mean, like, I guess the quick thing I would say is that if you're going to change your idea, really you have to decide if you're changing your market as well, and you're just moving into a completely different business, or if you're just realizing that the solution that you had for your problem wasn't the right solution. The worst thing that you see is when people are like, oh, this didn't actually solve the problem for people, so instead of me trying to solve the problem in a different way, I'm just going to take this random idea that I thought would solve the problem and then try and do whack-a-mole to try and get this to solve a problem for other people. And it becomes that like sort of classic solution in search of a problem. And you just see people wandering around with these widgets trying to like see if it will work with other people instead of sort of working backwards from what's the actual problem and then try to think of the solution. I don't know if you have anything else on that.
Yeah, the only thing I'm going to add is from a purely like immigration perspective. Who has heard of the O1 agent? Raise your hand. Cool. So if, as you know, if you incorporate and you're tied to one idea, if that doesn't work or the person you're on the incorporation documents, you break up whatever, you need to refile every time it's about 10K and like you don't know where it's going to go. There's a way to, and a lot of people within ODF do this. So the O1 agent was built for Hollywood actors so that if you do multiple movies, you can have multiple engagement. And so if you're Antonio Banderas and you come to the US and you have a few movies, but another come up, you can just tell your agent, hey, I'm also going to do this movie. We've started using this for tech a lot, which means you could have a consulting agreement. Let's say you do 5 hours consulting per friend and you have your company or something else. That also means that if your company goes under, you're able to add a new company. If you're early stage, I recommend you incorporate if you're like 80% sure on what you're doing, but it's good to have that just in case, so that you're able to like pivot.
That's simple. Yeah.
Well, what were some of the things which are like core values to your company or your community, which you started like with with when you started in the beginning, and you have held to them till now, and they have like became a big part of your culture at your companies or at your communities, and which you really encourage other companies to follow and other people to have in their mind when they're starting?
I think one of ours is global salaries. So we pay the same salary no matter where you live in the world, which is a very controversial thing and something that most don't do. Usually you've got all these like hidden, obscure, localized salaries. And for us, we pay the same across the board, because the other thing we do is open startup and open salaries. So if you go to cow.com/open, you can see exactly how much money everybody earns, where they're from, and everything like that. A lot of companies will say, if you look at the cow.com team, we have, a bunch of developers. I'm the only guy in the US. Most of our people are across Europe, and then you have like Mexico, India, and they're like, yeah, I could just pay them less, so why don't I? But I don't really believe that's fair. You're doing the same job as an American. So we kind of pay like a mid-tier American salary. Like, I don't think it will be that impressive in like the Bay Area or New York. But, like our employees in like Mexico and India, God, they're like living like kings. And it's great. Like, it's great. These people are just like, wow, I can get like some crazy car now. And honestly, it feels good because, I don't think truly most of us run companies to be a charity. We are capitalists at the end of the day, but I do care about like actually doing some good in the world. I care about doing good with like what cow.com actually achieves, and who uses the software, but also I care about doing good to our employees. And so as much as I think in every business sense it doesn't make sense to do like global salaries and things like that, it's just something that our team absolutely loves. They know they're getting a fair deal. You're getting paid the same regardless of your gender, your location, anything. And as well, is especially in this world, you get a lot of salary negotiations. Just because one guy is a bit more, like confident and is a bit more cheeky to be like, yeah, could you do like 220K instead of 200? Like, just because one guy asks that, does that really mean he should get paid 20 grand more for a job than you? Hell no. Everybody with us knows that like you're getting paid the same. So everything's just like very fixed, very open, very transparent. You guys can all see our salary bands. And that gives our employees so much sense of security. And it's great for like retention, employee happiness. We actually track a metric we do morale interviews with all the employees. We ask them like how they feel about compensation and salary. And they're all like, they feel great. There's no like, what does this guy earn? Like I do the same job as him, but like, does he earn more than me because he's like based somewhere, or because of his age, or because of his gender? No, that doesn't happen with us. And I honestly think it does yield a lot of benefit, even though a lot of people are quick to tell me that I'm an idiot for doing that and I could save money, but who cares?
But I do think, that works, to be honest, though, right? In this sense, like, look, right, I'll speak to this. Most of our team is India. We're about 3 people here in the Bay Area, and I think one of the filters, which I've found to be very effective, is to always hire for hustle more than pedigree, or like hire for like smarts and kind of hunger more than experience anyway, right? And as somebody who came from like a big tech company, you always gravitate to like some pedigree super early on. And I very quickly realized is that like being a startup, being entrepreneurial, like that drives like a lot more ROI for you. You can ship faster, than it is to have somebody who isn't entirely there. And so for me, I would say like one of our core company values is people that are entrepreneurial, who can be halfway around the world, not necessarily wait for instruction or like self-starting, and who can actually go pick up the baton and just ship and show results out the other end. So that's something that I learned, which is like a core part.
Oh, cool. So I love global teams. I think that one of the biggest misconceptions is that like one is better than the other. I think it's just solely down to like what the company that the founders want to build is, and then getting the right people for that. I really like in person for what we do, but some of the best companies that we've seen out of ODF are entirely remote. And one of the best companies that I've ever invested in is 6 co-founders. I think it's actually the top performing by multiple on invested capital. And it's crazy, right? Because you'd think 6 co-founders has got to be a terrible idea. And it probably is for 99% of companies, but you can do things your way for your company. Don't let people tell you that you have to fit some cookie cutter box for how to actually build your company. That would be the main cultural thing I want to say, like that I care about, is that it's your company. Don't listen, there are reasons why there are some general principles that you should really be thoughtful about violating. But just because there are conventions doesn't mean that you shouldn't defy them or do things your own way. Just make sure that you actually feel confident about why you're doing that. That company did what they did with the 6 co-founders. It's going extraordinarily well for them. There are other companies that are solo founded companies. There are some companies that are started by husbands and wives, right? Like, there are all different ways to build companies. You could have co-CEOs. You could have co-founders who are living in different parts of the world. There are all sorts of different ways to do it. Just do what's authentic to you and realize that as long as you have a good reason for why you're doing it, it could actually work out really well.
Cool. And quickly, the 2 values I prefer within ODF and solo that you can actually just use in your daily life, I think are great. For ODF, it's give before you take. So don't treat, interactions as like transactional. Think about how you can like help someone like connect or succeed. Usually you'll get something out of it. It goes around. And the second one, which we've seen a lot in solo founders and which I find incredibly wholesome and touching, is celebrate others' wins like it's yours. Sometimes like the founders will like celebrate so hard we think they've had a good news, but it's just someone else in the house. And I think it's like a great mindset.
I think we will take top 2-3 questions we
Ton.
got from the audience. So, yeah, how does ODF help for a founder who is not sure about his idea and where to start with?
Well, okay, I guess we could answer that one. Really quickly, show of hands, who's a founder today, like they're working on an idea? Okay, about half the room. That's awesome. How many of you already have co-founders or are looking for co-founders? Okay, and how many of you are sort of default solo or at least solo for right now? Okay, cool. That's interesting. Like, that's a pretty large show of hands for solo. So ODF exists to help bring people together at the same stage so that they could essentially have camaraderie and find potential collaborators. And if you think about it, you probably know a bunch of people who've started companies or who will start companies in the future. But how many people do you really know who are at the exact same stage as you, who you can actually learn from and also teach? And that's really the goal of ODF, is to bring those people together so that they can see what happens. And it could be anything from, you have a new best friend, to you find a co-founder, to you find early adopters for whatever you're building, or you get referrals to, potential customers. Essentially what we do is we create a space for people to explore ideas together and make progress together. And then we kind of let them run off and do their own thing. Because ultimately we do think that a lot of this stuff is a choose your own adventure. We really are not a big fan of this like factory model for startups. We think that the best thing you can do is actually be closer to a filmmaker than, somebody who's on a conveyor belt. Who wants to really feel like they're on a conveyor belt, right? I think you want to feel like you're creating something that's of yourself, right? Not something that you're just being spit out of some factory for startups, right? Who wants to be that, right? You probably want to be like actually expressing yourself, or at least, feel like you have the ability to. So that's kind of how we think about it. Do you want to have anything else? It was like a, cool.
Think we have a lot of questions about what is a good stage for fundraising. We also have a lot of questions about visa types. We have a whole team of like legal.
Yeah, I can do that. For visa types, like talk to lawyers, but essentially on OPT you can ask university to start your company. If you're just on an F1, you need to drop out. This is not legal advice, blah blah blah.
Okay.
Hey, what is a good stage for fundraising? Maybe Nishkaam, you could.
Sure. So I guess what you're asking is like, when should you start fundraising out the other end? And I think for the early stages is when you feel that you've got some initial traction, some signal. And what I'll say about that is that don't be afraid just to start early and have a friendly conversation, right? And I think like one of the other like resources which I got, and actually from ODF, I was a part of the ODF 14 program, was, this book is by like Ryan Breslau, which is that you're not fundraising until you're actually fundraising, as in, that just take meetings, start to get to know some of the VCs, see what the early feedback is. But again, don't start it as a process and don't make it a process until you get some early signals.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Ryan Reslow, obviously sort of celebrity founder, he probably has a different tactic for fundraising that then would apply maybe for the average person in this room, because maybe we're not all celebrity founders. Just guessing, maybe. And like the reality is, I think that you generally want to spend as little time as possible thinking about investors and as much time as thinking about customers. But, eventually, once you actually do want to go for investors, you just pile it on. Because at that point, you want to do what's called price discovery. So if you only meet with one or two investors and maybe one of them offers to invest, which could happen, you don't really know if you're getting the terms that are right for you. The only way you know that is by having a big active process with a lot of different firms, because each one of them is independently evaluating and assessing how much they think your company is worth. And ultimately, that gives you a lot of leverage. It gives you a lot of information about how other people think about your company. And also, when you hear the different sort of concerns that those investors have about your company, you want to write that down, because ultimately that will be a thing that you'll want to make sure that you have good answers for, or realize is just a bogus question. Because sometimes people ask dumb questions, and honestly, they're just using them as excuses. Like, oftentimes when they pass because of something like TAM, maybe it is because they worry about TAM, but usually it's just they don't believe that you're going to be successful, and they just don't want to say that. So don't take the reasons that people pass quite as seriously as they might try and make them seem to be.
I think these guys said most of the smart advice, but I think really the answer is the most unhelpful one. It depends. Fundraising should be when it's right for you. And that can be different depending on your financial circumstances. It could be on like the company's monetary needs. Like if, obviously, as you know, the longer you can go without raising, all that time you're building up your users, you're building up your potential valuation. As was said before, VCs are sharks. They're sharks in any sense. They'll target you if you're an immigrant. They'll target you if you're a little bit uncertain about something. And so the longer you can go, really, you're going to kind of walk into those meetings and be like, yeah, I have a bunch of users. And they'll be like, wow, good valuation goes to you. Like quite literally, in the most simple sense, it's that. But that being said, I started Cow.com when I had like $600 net worth. I needed some money. So yeah, just be aware of like the kind of deals it will be. I see some like friends and peers startups where they really do need a lot of capital to get going. Like if you're building the next like Palantir or something, like an insanely complex thing, you're gonna need a ton of engineers and things like that. But if we're just talking about like general, especially as well non-tech stuff as well, that requires a lot of upfront capital. But in the tech world, some of us can get by like vibe coding, Claude code or something like that. Just keep it going for a while. And because like if you're in a job and you're chilling and you're doing something on the side, or you're quite focused on your studies or something, then sure, like being a founder is great, raising money is great, but don't screw yourself over by trying to rush into it too much.
I think we will take one last question. I think the overarching theme is AI has made it possible more for non-technical founders to start a platform or a website or an app. What do you think? How should a non-technical founder take the first steps in building an idea?
Please, for the love of God, don't just vibe code something without anybody technical. You see that app T, the thing about women to spill secrets on men and how all the driver's licenses got leaked? Yeah, that's what happens when you let like Claude loose on this kind of thing. I think that you should probably at least have somebody technical. So if you're non-technical, if you could raise like a tiny pre-seed or something like that, and then like hire somebody who is technical, you at least, AI just makes people 10x engineers. They don't replace engineers currently. You definitely need somebody overseeing it and making sure it isn't let loose. So yeah, I think just be careful is my only addition.
So that's totally fair. So look, I think, that you don't, I'll kind of say this, I think all the vibe coding tools are great, but ultimately, I think you should still add like a lot of weight to like a technical co-founder. And I think as soon as you have some initial signals, you've got some validation is working, do bring somebody in who really understands it. Because one of the things which I've found is that very early on, you start to almost make these micro decisions every day for like how you're building your service. your product and app. And I think at the early stages, there's probably not a lot of deviation. But over time, even a 1 degree of separation from your optimal state to where you are will over time start to compound. And now there's a big gap. So I would definitely bring in, somebody who's sharp and who can help build.
Those are great pieces of feedback and advice. I would say 2 things. The first is that you could always start with a prototype and realize that you need to bring on somebody who can actually make sure that there aren't major security vulnerabilities and things like that. I think that the most irresponsible thing is that they let that thing scale to such a degree without having real smart technical talent behind it. But if you're just trying to do a proof of concept, you really don't need to go and try and find a technical co-founder right now, unless you're doing something that's super, super technical, in which case, should you really be the founder of that or the CEO of that? Maybe, but maybe not, right? Everybody in the Solo Founders program so far has been technical, has been an engineer. But the other thing is we've seen a lot of great solo founders who aren't technical. One of them is Adil. He's the founder of Magic School. It's now the fastest growing education company of all time. And he was a high school principal, had no engineering experience, but he found a person who he was friends with to help him essentially build a prototype on Replit over a weekend. Had 100 users the next week, 1,000 users after that. He quickly recruited somebody who he knew to be the CTO because it was clear that they needed to have actual structure in place to make sure that this thing was safe and secure. And they built an incredible engineering organization. But he did it as a solo founder and as a non-technical one who had no actual startup experience. And then another founder we work with is Lauren from Roots, and she's building an incredible business in real estate. And again, she really needed to learn about the industry, not necessarily build the technology. So I think that there's a lot of value to having technical talent, technical co-founder, but you can also make a lot of progress on your own.
Yeah, and just as a continuation of that, and maybe you guys in Julian have had this issue before, there's nothing worse than someone being like, I'm looking for a technical co-founder to do everything and I have this idea. Just make some progress. If you make some progress, you have domain expertise, something you're excited about, you'll be able to attract someone, but just don't wait and fantasize about something that will not happen.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. This was great. And thank you so much for the audience members as well. We have a little memento for everyone. So,
and if you're a solo founder, come and grab a sticker from us.